"You," Nora Bennett said, and the word came out flat as a dropped plate. "You're the man who took my house." The candle between them guttered in the warm evening air. Across the little iron table on the restaurant terrace, the man who had risen to pull out her chair went very still, one hand still on the chair back, and she watched the polite blind date smile drain out of his face like water out of a cracked bowl. "Miss Bennett," he said, not a question. He knew exactly who she was. He had always known exactly who she was. She should have stood up. Later, she would spend a long time on that. The 2 clean seconds in which she could have picked up her bag and walked out into the summer street and let this whole impossible thing stay a coincidence her sister would never live down. But she didn't move. And what she didn't yet understand was that her sister had known precisely what she was doing when she wrote his name on that card, because Camille always knew. The evening this began had been the hottest of the year so far, the kind of July afternoon that made the clay go soft and greedy under Nora's hands and refused to let it firm up no matter how she worked it. She had the studio's back door propped open with a chipped brick, and even so the air inside sat thick and unmoving, smelling of wet earth and the mineral tang of glaze and the faint scorch of the kiln cooling in the corner. Sweat gathered at the small of her back. A fan pushed the heat around without cooling it. She pressed her thumb into the center of the spinning bowl, felt the wall rise obediently between her fingers, and thought, as she thought most days now, that this was enough. A room, a wheel, her own 2 hands. It had to be enough, because it was what she had left. The bell over the front door jangled. "Don't get up! Don't get up! I know the way!" Camille's voice arrived a full second before Camille did, bright and carrying, cutting through the studio's hush the way it cut through everything. "God, Nora, it's a furnace in here. How do you breathe? You're going to shrivel into a little raisin, and they'll find you fused to that wheel. Then I'll have died doing what I love." Nora didn't look up. The bowl wobbled, and she eased her pressure, coaxing it back. "What do you want, Cam? That is a horrible way to greet your only sister." Camille appeared in the doorway to the throwing room in a sleeveless linen dress the color of fresh cream. Gold at her ears, not a strand of her hair out of place despite the heat that had reduced Nora to a smeared, aproned wreck. She surveyed the room with the particular expression she'd been making since they were girls, fond and appalled in equal measure. "It smells like a riverbank in here. It's clay. I know it's clay. I'm making an observation." Camille lifted a half-finished mug off the drying shelf, turned it over, set it down a half-inch from where it had been. "Honestly, you've buried yourself alive. When did you last put on a dress that wasn't covered in mud? When did you last talk to a human who wasn't me or that terrifying old man who delivers your bags of powder? His name is Walt." The wheel slowed under Nora's foot. She lifted her hands away from the bowl, and it stood there, finished, perfect, small. She reached for the wire to cut it free. "And I talk to people. I talked to 3 customers on Saturday. Selling them soup dishes is not the same as talking to people, and you know it." Camille pulled the second stool over and sat, arranging herself on it as though it were a chaise. Up close, under the bright talk, there was something wound tight in her, a brittleness at the corners of her smile. She smoothed an invisible crease on her skirt. "It's been 14 months, Nora," the wire slipped. The bowl's rim caught and dragged, and a long, ugly crescent tore through the wall of it, ruining an hour's work in half a second. Nora looked at the wreck of it and set her jaw. "I know how long it's been." 14 months since she had sat in a conference room with cold coffee going skin thick in front of her and signed her name to the end of 9 years. 14 months since Trevor had slid a pen across a polished table and not quite met her eyes, and the man beside him, his lawyer, his terribly good, terribly expensive lawyer, had done all the talking in a low, even, unhurried voice while the numbers came apart and rearranged themselves into a shape where she got the studio and the debt, and Trevor got everything that had ever gleamed. She didn't think about that room. She had a rule about not thinking about that room. That's exactly my point. Camille's voice softened, which was worse. She reached out and put her manicured hand over Nora's clay-gray one, and Nora let her, because it was easier than not. You did everything right, and and now you're in here hiding, and I hate it. I hate watching you do this. You were the fun one. Do you remember being the fun one? Vaguely, she had better knees. See, that's the sister I want back. Camille squeezed her hand and released it, and then Nora should have noticed the shift, the way her sister's chin came up, the way she reached into her bag with the air of a magician arriving at the good part of the trick, which is why I did a thing. Don't be mad. Nora went cold in the July heat. Cam, just listen, the last time you said don't be mad. I ended up at a wine and cheese night for people recovering from breakups, wearing a name tag, being lectured about my chakras by a man named Sequoia. Sequoia was lovely, and you were rude to him. Camille produced a small cream-colored card from her bag and held it against her chest, face down, the way she'd held playing cards when they were children and she was cheating. This is different. This is a real dinner, a real restaurant, the terrace at Marlowe's, the good one, on the water, with a real, grown, employed, extremely presentable man. Tomorrow at 8. It's all arranged. I arranged it. Then unarrange it. I can't. A flicker there. Quick. Gone. It's done. He's expecting you. Who is he? Nora peeled off her apron and crossed to the sink, turning the tap on hard, letting the water run gray off her hands. Over the rush of it, she watched her sister in the little mirror she kept propped on the windowsill. You know I don't do this. I told you at Easter. I told you at Mum's birthday. I am not ready to sit across a table and perform being fine for some stranger who's going to ask what happened. He won't ask what happened. Camille said it too fast. They always ask what happened. He won't. Camille stood, tucked the card behind the row of finished bowls on the front counter, where Nora would have to reach past everything she'd made to get it. His name is Julian. He's steady, he's kind, actually, underneath, and he's had a hard year too, so the two of you can just be two people who've had a hard year, in a nice place, with good fish. That's all it has to be. One dinner. She was already moving toward the door, her escape velocity building, the way it always did once she'd planted the thing she came to plant. If it's awful, you never have to see him again, and you can hold it over me until we're 90. Camille, 8 o'clock. Wear the green. You still have the green? The bell jangled. Love you. Drink water. You look like a raisin. And she was gone, out into the shimmering street, leaving behind her perfume and the small cream card standing on end behind Nora's bowls like a tooth. Nora dried her hands. She did not pick up the card. She swept the ruined bowl off the wheel head and dropped it in the reclaim bucket, where it slumped back into formless gray. And she told herself she would call Camille tonight and cancel, and she almost believed it. She wore the green. She told herself the whole way there that she was only going to be polite, that she owed her sister a single civilized dinner to buy herself a year's peace. That Camille, for all her theatrics, had never actually steered her wrong on purpose, thoughtlessly, yes, 100 times, but never with intent. Nora believed that about her sister the way you believe the floor will hold, without examining it, because examining it was unthinkable. Marlowe's sat right at the water's edge, its terrace strung with warm bulbs that were just beginning to earn their light as the sky went the deep bruised gold of a summer evening. The tide was out. The air smelled of salt and hot stone, and, from the kitchen, garlic and something buttery and searing. Gulls complained overhead. A boat's rigging chimed against its mast somewhere down the dark line of the marina, a small bright sound over the low murmur of diners. Nora stood at the top of the terrace steps in the green dress, it still fit, which had surprised and obscurely annoyed her, and felt her heart doing something ridiculous, some frightened animal thing. And she pressed her thumb hard into the pad of her palm, the way she did at the wheel, and made herself breathe. One dinner. Good fish. 2 people who'd had a hard year. The hostess led her toward the railing, to a small iron table set for 2 with a single candle already lit against the coming dusk, and the man sitting there rose to meet her, tall, dark-suited despite the heat. The jacket off and folded over the empty chair, his shirt sleeves turned back over his forearms, a face that was handsome in a tired, careful way, the kind of face that gave nothing for free. He rose, and he reached to draw out her chair, and he began, in a low, even courteous voice, to say, "You must be." And then he saw her, and she saw him, and the whole terrace, the gulls, the rigging, the buttering kitchen, the warm-strung lights, all of it dropped away into a roaring silence, because she knew that voice. She had heard that voice take her marriage apart, one clean sentence at a time, across a polished conference table, while cold coffee went skin thick in front of her. She knew the careful set of that mouth. She knew the unhurried way he'd said the word equitable as though it meant something kind. "You," Nora said, and the word came out flat as a dropped plate. "You're the man who took my house." The candle guttered. Julian Vale did not sit back down. He stood with one hand on the chair he'd meant to offer her, and to his credit she would grant him this much. Later, grudgingly, he did not pretend. He did not do the thing she was braced for, the smooth, surprised laugh, the "do I know you?" He simply looked at her with an expression that was slowly filling up with a horror to match her own, and said, quietly, "Mrs. Ashford Bennett." The name came out of her like a blade. "It's Bennett now, as you would know, since you're the one who," her voice betrayed her, caught. And she hated that more than anything, hated the small wet catch of it in front of this man of all men. She stopped. She pressed her thumb into her palm until it hurt. "I didn't know," he said. "I want to be clear about that, before anything else. I did not know it was going to be you." How reassuring. "Miss Bennett, you billed my husband $400 an hour to make sure I walked out of 9 years with a leaking kiln and a loan." She was aware of the couple at the next table going quiet, aware of the hostess hovering, aware that her hands were shaking and that she'd raised her voice a notch above the murmur of the terrace, and she could not entirely make herself care. "And now you're sitting at a candlelit table waiting to buy me fish. This is Camille. Oh, this is Camille." Something moved behind his eyes at the name. She caught it and filed it away without understanding it. "Please sit down," he said. "I am absolutely not going to sit down." "Then don't." "But you drove here, and you're upset. and I'd rather you had a glass of water and 5 minutes before you get back in a car." He said it plainly, without heat, the same even register she remembered, and it landed exactly wrong. Because it was reasonable, and she did not want him to be reasonable. She wanted him to be a monster she could hate cleanly. "I'll stand if you'd prefer. But I think you should know I was told almost nothing about tonight, and I have a fairly strong suspicion neither of us was told the truth." That stopped her. She stood there in her green dress, with the warm bulbs coming up gold around them, and the tide flat smelling of salt, and the candle throwing its small, unsteady light across the man who had, in a very real and documentable sense, dismantled her life, and she heard the thing under his words, the thing that snagged. "What do you mean?" she said slowly. "Neither of us was told the truth." Julian Vale reached into the inside pocket of the jacket folded over the chair. He drew out a card, a small cream-colored card, the twin of the one still standing behind her bowls at the studio, the one she had refused all evening to admit she'd read a dozen times. He set it on the white tablecloth between the candle and the little vase of dune grass, and turned it so she could see the looping handwriting she had known her whole life. Her sister's handwriting. "A woman phoned my office on Monday," he said. "She said she was calling on behalf of a friend. She said the friend was shy and recently divorced and wonderful once you got past the frost, and that I mustn't, under any circumstances, mention how we'd been put in touch, because it would spook her." His jaw tightened very slightly. She was extremely specific about the restaurant, and the table, and the time. I assumed it was one of those quiet setups people do for the newly single. I've been out of my old life for a while. I said yes, because a colleague vouched for her, and because I'm apparently more lonely than I'd realized, and because... He stopped himself. It doesn't matter why. Nora looked at the card. "Marlowe's Terrace, 8 o'clock. Wear something you feel like yourself in. Be brave." "See," it said, in Camille's unmistakable hand. The same hand that had tucked its twin behind the row of finished bowls where Nora would have to reach past everything she'd made to take it. "She wrote to both of us," Nora said. The realization arrived cold and total, dropping through her like a stone through still water. She set the whole thing. She knew who you were. Her eyes came up to his. Did she know who you were? Did she know you were his? "I don't know what your sister knew." His voice was careful now, lawyer careful, and she saw him choosing the words the way she'd once watched him choose them across that other table. "But my name isn't a common one. And the divorce was less than 2 years ago, and I don't believe in a coincidence this exact." He paused. "Do you?" She did not. That was the trouble. Camille was thoughtless. Camille was theatrical. Camille rearranged your mugs and called you a raisin. But Camille also never, ever forgot a name attached to a wound. Least of all a wound of Nora's. Because Camille collected the shape of other people's hurts the way other women collected earrings. She had sat with Nora in the gray weeks after the conference room. She had heard the name Julian Vale spoken through gritted teeth more than once. She had said, in that very kitchen, over that very cold coffee, he should have to look you in the eye someday, that lawyer. He should have to sit across a table from you as a person and not a case file. The gulls wheeled and cried. The rigging chimed. Somewhere behind them a cork came free with a soft, festive pop, and a table of strangers laughed at something that had nothing to do with either of them. "Sit down, Miss Bennett," Julian said again, gentler now. "Not because I've earned a minute of your time. I haven't. But because I think your sister has done something neither of us understands yet. And I would rather we understand it than let it send us both back into our cars angry and none the wiser." He pulled the chair out the last few inches. One glass of water. You can leave the second it stops being worth the trouble. And that reasonableness, that low, steady voice, offering her nothing but a chair and 5 minutes and the truth, was the thing she should have refused. She knew it even as her knees betrayed her, even as the fight went out of her legs, and she sat, spine straight, hands folded on the white cloth beside her sister's handwriting, across a candlelit table from the man who had taken her house. "Water," she said. "And then you're going to tell me every single thing my sister said to you on that phone. Every word." All right. He sat. He signaled without fuss for the water. And then, because the universe was not finished with either of them that evening, his gaze moved past her shoulder toward the terrace steps, and something in his face changed, went smooth and shut and braced, the face of a man watching weather come in off the water. And he said, so quietly she almost missed it under the gulls, "You should know we're about to have company." Nora turned. Coming up the lantern-lit steps of Marlowe's terrace, phone pressed to her ear, cream linen glowing in the last of the gold light. Her expression caught somewhere between triumph and terror. Was Camille. Camille stopped 3 steps from the top, one sandal hovering, the phone still glued to her ear, though there was plainly no one on the other end of it. Nora watched her sister take in the tableau, the candle, the 2 chairs, both of them seated, the cream card lying face up on the white cloth like an exhibit, and watched the triumph slide clean off Camille's face, leaving only the terror behind it. "Cam," Nora said. She did not raise her voice. She had learned, in 14 months, that the quiet voice traveled further. "Come here. You're both sitting." Camille lowered the phone. She came up the last steps slowly, the way a child approaches a broken thing it is going to be blamed for. "You're sitting down. That's good. That's actually, I wanted on the record that I was fully prepared to find you throwing bread rolls at each other, so this is." "Sit." Camille sat. She pulled the empty chair from the neighboring table before the hovering hostess could intervene, and she perched on the edge of it in her glowing linen, and for once in her life she had nothing prepared. Nora had seen her sister talk her way out of a parking ticket, a jury summons, and a christening she'd forgotten to attend. She had never once seen her sit down and go silent. "Julian," Camille said finally, to him, not to Nora. "I'm sorry. I should have. This wasn't how it was supposed to. How was it supposed to be?" Julian's voice stayed level, but there was iron laid along the bottom of it now, the register Nora remembered from the far side of the polished table, the one that made you feel the ground shifting under a sentence before you understood the words. "You told me a colleague's friend. You told me shy and newly single. You did not tell me it was a woman whose divorce I closed. You made me an ambush, Miss Bennett. I'd like to know why." The salt wind lifted the edge of the tablecloth. Down in the dark marina, the rigging chimed its small, indifferent chime. Nora sat very still between the 2 of them, her thumb pressed hard into her palm, and understood that she was about to hear something she could not unhear. "Because I ran out of gentle ways," Camille said. "Cam, no, you asked. You both asked. So let me just say it badly, because there's no good way." Camille set the phone face down on the cloth. Her hand, Nora noticed, was not quite steady, the gold ring on it catching the candlelight in little jumps. 14 months, Nora. 14 months of you in that oven of a room with the door propped open, making the same bowl over and over, telling me you're fine, telling Mum you're fine, telling the whole world you're fine in that flat little voice. And I couldn't watch it anymore. "You don't grieve. You just get quieter. You've been getting quieter since you were 9 years old, and I am so tired of losing you an inch at a time. So you served me up to his lawyer." Nora heard how her own voice shook and could not stop it. "That was your fix. Not a holiday. Not a therapist. Him. He isn't just his lawyer." Camille said it fast, and then flinched as though the sentence had gotten away from her. The terrace noise went on around them. The cork pop laughter, the clink of a spoon on porcelain, a gull dropping to the railing and eyeing the bread basket with yellow contempt. But at their table, a small, cold silence opened. "What does that mean?" Nora said. Camille looked at Julian. Julian looked at Camille. And Nora, who had spent 9 years reading Trevor's face across a breakfast table and gotten every single reading wrong, watched two people who barely knew each other exchange a glance that had something already inside it, some shared knowledge she had not been handed, and felt the old familiar floor tilt. "You two have met," Nora said. "Before tonight. You've spoken." Once, Julian's jaw worked. "On the telephone. Monday. I told you that. You didn't say she used your first name like a friend does. You didn't say," Nora stopped, "she made herself breathe the salt and the garlic and the hot stone. Camille, look at me. Not at him. At me. What aren't you saying?" Her sister's eyes were bright and swimming, and Camille, brittle, theatrical, invincible Camille, who had steered every room she'd ever entered, put both hands flat on the tablecloth as if to hold it down against the wind, and said, "He came to me. 3 weeks ago. He found me, not the other way around." The candle guttered and steadied. "He found you," Nora repeated. "I'll explain," Julian said. "You will not." Camille rounded on him with a flash of the old fire. "I got us into this, I'll say it. You'll only make it sound like a deposition." She turned back to her sister, and her voice cracked down the middle. "He came to the gallery, asked for me by name, said he'd handled the divorce, and that he'd left the firm since. And that there was something about the settlement that hadn't sat right with him, and he wanted to find a way to make it right, quietly, without dragging you back through any of it. And I looked at this man standing in my gallery in a good suit saying he wanted to help my sister. And Nora, I thought, God forgive me, I thought, here is a decent man who already knows the worst of it, who won't ask her what happened because he was in the room, who's carrying his own guilt around like a stone. And I thought if I could just get the two of you in the same place without either of you bolting, you thought you'd matchmake me with the man who took my house." Nora's laugh came out cracked and terrible. "Because that's romantic. Because that fixes it. Because he's sorry." Camille's voice broke free of the murmur, and a table two down glanced over. She lowered it, fierce, because in 14 months he's the only person connected to that whole nightmare who ever once said the word sorry, and you deserve to hear it, and you would never in 1,000 years have sat down to hear it if I'd told you his name in advance. Nora turned to Julian. The candle lit the tired, careful planes of his face, and she looked for the smoothness she remembered. The unhurried lawyer's calm that had made equitable sound like a kindness. And she found instead a man sitting very upright under an accusation he wasn't defending himself against. "Is that true?" she said. "You went looking for my sister." "Yes, not a flinch. That part is true." "Why?" "Because the settlement was legal," he said, "and it was not right, and I knew the difference at the time, and I did it anyway, and it has cost me a great deal of sleep since." He turned the water glass a quarter turn on the cloth, the only restless thing about him. "I'll tell you the rest. All of it. But not to make Camille's dinner come true, and not to be forgiven. Because I don't think I get to ask you for that. I came to your sister because I found something in the file after I left the firm. And I didn't know what to do with it, and she was easier to reach than you. Found something. The salt wind went cold along Nora's bare arms despite the July heat. What does that mean, you found something? What's in the file? And Julian Vale opened his mouth to answer and closed it. Because at that exact moment, from the top of the lantern-lit steps, a voice Nora had spent 14 months teaching herself to forget cut clean across the terrace. Nora? My God. It is you. Every muscle in her body knew the voice before her mind caught up. She turned, and there, of course, because the universe had decided to empty its whole cruel drawer onto this one terrace tonight, stood Trevor Ashford, sun-brown and easy in an open-collared shirt, the color of expensive sand. One hand resting on the shoulder of a woman Nora didn't recognize, a glossy, dark-haired woman in silk, who was already smiling the bright, careful smile of someone about to be introduced to an awkward situation. I don't believe it, Trevor said, and he came toward their table with his arms slightly open, as though the appropriate thing, the natural thing, were an embrace. The one restaurant. What are the... And then his gaze slid past Nora to the man across from her, and landed, and stuck. Julian? The two men looked at each other across the little iron table, and Nora, sitting between the wreck of her marriage and the architect of its terms, felt the last of the warm evening drain out of the air. Trevor, Julian said, flat, careful, the voice from the conference room. You two know each, Trevor started, and then the machinery behind his handsome face began, visibly, to turn. She watched him do the arithmetic she had done 20 minutes ago, the card, the candle, the ex-wife, and the divorce lawyer at a table set for a date, and she watched his mouth do something unpleasant at one corner. An expression she knew intimately. The little private smirk he wore when he'd decided a thing was beneath him. Well, he said softly, isn't this cozy? Trevor, the dark-haired woman, touched his arm. Maybe we should. No, Priya, this is my ex-wife. He gestured at Nora with an open-handedness that made her skin crawl. Nora, and this is the man who wrote our divorce. Together, on a date, he laughed, one short, disbelieving note. You couldn't make it up. You genuinely could not make it up. 14 months, and this is the company you... It isn't a date. Nora heard herself say it and hated that she'd said it, hated that her first instinct in front of Trevor was still, after everything, to explain herself. She stood, the iron chair scraped. And it isn't your business, which is a thing you gave up rights to when you signed. Clearly, it isn't my business. Trevor's smile didn't move, but his eyes had gone hard and bright. I'm just fascinated by the taste of it. Your sister set this up, I assume? Camille always did think she was cleverer than the room. His gaze flicked to Camille and back. You want to be careful, Nora. Men like Julian don't do anything without a reason. Do you, Julian? There's always a reason. There's always a clause. He leaned in a fraction. Ask him why he really left the firm. Go on. Ask him. That's enough. Julian was on his feet now, too, unhurried. And though he was no taller than Trevor, there was something in the set of him that made the other man rock back half an inch. You're upsetting people who didn't come here to see you. Take your evening somewhere else. Or what, counselor? But Trevor was already stepping back, the smirk still fixed, the dark-haired woman tugging gently at his sleeve now. And he let himself be turned toward the far end of the terrace with the air of a man conceding a point only because it bored him. Over his shoulder, to Nora, light as a thrown coin, "Good to see you looking well, Nora. Green suits you." It always did. And then he was gone, threading between the tables toward the water railing, his hand returning to the small of the dark-haired woman's back. And Nora stood there in the green dress he had just weaponized with 3 words. Her heart slamming, the whole terrace pretending very hard not to have watched. She sat back down because her legs required it. For a moment, none of them spoke. The gulls cried. The kitchen door banged, releasing a gust of butter and searing garlic and the high clatter of a busy pass. Camille had gone the color of the tablecloth. Julian lowered himself slowly back into his chair, his eyes still tracking Trevor's retreat across the boards, and Nora watched a muscle jump once in his jaw and go still. "Ask him why he really left the firm," Nora said quietly. "That's what he said. Ask you. I know what he said, so I'm asking." Julian was quiet for a long moment. The candle threw its unsteady light up under his chin, and out on the black water, a late boat drew a line of white foam toward the marina mouth, its engine a low patient throb under the terrace noise. "I left," he said, "because I stopped being able to do the job, which in my profession is not a resignation. It's a fall. You're paid to get your client the most the law will allow. And for a long time, I was very good at that. And I told myself the wall between the most and the right was somebody else's to worry about. A judge's. A conscience's, not mine." He turned the water glass again, that single, restless quarter turn. And then there was a file where the most and the right came apart so far that I couldn't put them back together in my own head. And I got what I was paid to get, and I couldn't sleep afterward, and I've been unable to sleep properly since. That was the file, Miss Bennett. That was your file. It was the last one I closed clean, and it broke something in me I hadn't known was load-bearing. Nora sat with that. Across the table, her sister had begun, silently to cry, not theatrically, for once, but the small, ashamed, leaking kind, one knuckle pressed to her mouth, and Nora found she had no comfort to spare in either direction, no hand to give, because both her hands were full of holding herself together. "That's a very good speech," she said. "You've had 14 months to write it." "I have," Julian agreed. "It's still true. Trevor said there's always a clause." She made herself hold his gaze. "You said you found something in the file after you left. Something that hadn't sat right. I want you to tell me what it is, right now, on this terrace, in plain words, before my sister ruins another napkin. What did you find?" Julian glanced at Camille, and Camille, wet-eyed, wretched, gave a tiny nod, as though releasing him from a promise Nora hadn't known existed, and that small exchange lit a new and colder fear in Nora's chest, because it meant her sister already knew. Her sister had known for 3 weeks. Her sister had sat across the cold coffee and rearranged the mugs and called her a raisin and known this thing, whatever it was, the whole time. "The house," Julian said. "The one you keep saying I took. In the settlement it was valued, sold, and the proceeds divided under a formula that looked, on paper, scrupulously even. Trevor's disclosure listed it as your sole marital asset of significance, and everything was built around that number." He paused. The boat's wake slapped once against the pilings below and subsided. But the house was never the significant asset. There was another one. Held somewhere your disclosure didn't reach, structured so it wouldn't have to be named. And I knew it was there because I'm the one who told him how to build the box to put it in. 2 years before you ever married him. He was a client of the firm long before he was your husband's divorce. The words arrived slowly and then all at once, like the tide coming back over the flats. "You're saying he hid money." Nora's voice had gone very flat and very far away. You're saying my husband hid money from me, and you helped him build the box before we were even, and then you sat across from me and divided the house as if it were everything, knowing it wasn't. Yes, and you knew that. In the room. While I signed. Yes, he did not look away, and she gave him that much later, too, grudgingly, that he made himself hold her eyes while he said it. I knew it in the room. And I let the number stand, because it was legal, and because it was my job, and because I told myself the wall between the most and the right belonged to someone else. That is the thing I found that I already knew. That's what I couldn't sleep on. And when I finally understood, I couldn't carry it in silence anymore. I did the coward's version of the brave thing. I didn't come to you, I went to your sister. His voice, for the first time all evening, thinned at the edge. Because I was afraid of exactly the look you're giving me now. Down the terrace, at the water railing, Trevor Ashford was laughing at something, his head tipped back, sun-brown and easy, the dark-haired woman's silk catching the lantern light beside him. A man who had signed his name to the end of 9 years and walked out into a summer evening with everything that had ever gleamed, and more that Nora had never been allowed to count. Nora looked at him laughing. She looked at her sister crying. She looked at the man across the candle who had just handed her, in plain words on a public terrace, the single fact capable of blowing her carefully sealed gray life wide open. I need you to understand something, she said, and her voice did not shake now. It had gone past shaking into a terrible clarity. 14 months ago, I decided the worst thing that would ever happen to me had already happened, and I built a whole life on top of that decision. A small life, a studio and a wheel and my own 2 hands, and it was enough because I made it be enough. And you two, you found something that says the worst thing wasn't the worst thing, that it was actually worse than I ever let myself know, and you sat on it, and you plotted, and you dressed it up as a blind date so I'd swallow it with the fish. She stood again, more steadily this time, and picked up her bag. That's a lot to do to a person who only asked to be left alone. Nora, please. Camille reached across the table and caught her wrist, and her fingers were cold. Please don't drive like this. Please just sit for 1 more minute. There's more. You have to hear the rest. It changes. There's more. Nora looked down at her sister's hand on her wrist, the gold ring, the perfect manicure, the tears she'd actually cried. Of course there's more. There's always a clause. Even he said so. She detached her wrist gently, which was somehow worse than if she'd wrenched it free. I'm going home, Camille, to the oven room, with the door propped open, where at least when a thing falls apart in my hands, I'm the only one who did it. She was 3 steps toward the lantern-lit stairs when Julian's voice reached her, not raised, not lawyerly. Just low and even, and pitched to carry only as far as she stood. There's a deadline, he said. She stopped. She did not turn around. Below her the marina rigging chimed and chimed. Whatever you decide about me, about your sister, about any of it, decide it knowing there's a clock. The way the box was built, there's a window where what he hid can still be reached, legally, cleanly, by you. It doesn't stay open. After a certain date, the structure locks, and the money is his beyond anyone's reach, and I built it that way, so I know to the day when it closes. A pause, and the sea wind moved between them. That date is 3 weeks from Friday. That's the real reason your sister couldn't wait for a gentler way. That's the reason she couldn't unarrange tonight. It isn't that the table was booked, Ms. Bennett. It's that there's almost no time left. Nora stood at the top of the steps with the whole gold-lit terrace at her back, the gulls, the buttering kitchen, her ex-husband laughing at the railing, her sister wrecked at a candle-lit table beside the man who had taken her house and was now, impossibly, offering to help her take something back. And she felt the small sealed gray life she had so carefully built give one long slow crack straight down its center, like clay drying wrong. 3 weeks from Friday. She did not turn around, but she did not go down the steps either. She stood there in the green dress in the warm salt dark, her thumb pressed white against her palm, and she heard herself say, to the water, to none of them, to all of them. Say that again, the part about the window. And this time start at the beginning, and don't leave anything out, because if I sit back down at that table, Julian Vale, I am going to want every word, and I will know the ones you skip. Behind her, very quietly, she heard him pull out her chair. Behind her, very quietly, she heard him pull out her chair. And she turned and came back to it, not because he'd asked, and not because she'd forgiven anything, but because 3 words had rearranged the whole terrace, and she could not walk down those steps carrying them alone. She sat. She set her bag in her lap like a shield. The candle had burned down a finger's width, and the wax had run and stiffened along one side. And she looked at that instead of at either of them while she waited for her heart to stop slamming. From the beginning, she said, you said there's a window. Start before the window. Start with the box. Julian folded his hands on the cloth. When he spoke, it was the conference room voice, but slowed, the edges sanded off. As if he'd learned in 14 months to say these things gently or not at all. A man who owns things wants some of those things to be invisible on paper. That's legal. Up to a point, it's called asset protection. And half my old firm did nothing else. You build a structure. A holding company that owns another company that owns the thing you care about. Registered somewhere that doesn't publish names. On your disclosure, you list the top of the tower, and it looks like a modest little office with 2 chairs in it. Underneath, out of sight, sits the actual money. And you built Trevor's tower. I built the box at the bottom of it. He didn't soften it. 2 years before he married you. He came to the firm as a client. A man with a small fortune and a large appetite to keep it, and I did competent, expensive, entirely lawful work. I never thought about a wife. There wasn't one yet. The salt wind lifted the tablecloth and dropped it. Down the boards, at the railing, Trevor laughed his easy sun-brown laugh at something the dark-haired woman had said, and the sound carried, and all 3 of them at the little table went still for a beat until it passed. Then he married me, Nora said. Then he married you. And the box I'd built sat exactly where it was, doing exactly what it was designed to do, and when the marriage came apart, he brought the whole matter back to the firm, and it landed on the desk of the lawyer who knew the tower better than anyone alive. Me, he turned the water glass its single, restless quarter turn. So I sat across from you, and I divided a house. A real house. A real number, sold and split down the middle so cleanly a judge could have wept over the fairness of it. And the fairness was the trick. The house was the loud asset. It was supposed to be loud. It was there to be looked at so that no one would ask what wasn't in the room. How much? The question came out of her flat and cold. What wasn't in the room? Julian was quiet. Camille made a small sound and pressed her knuckle harder to her mouth. More than the house, he said. Several times the house. The number didn't have a shape yet, he hadn't given her one, but the size of it did, and the size of it went through Nora like the wire through clay. One long, clean drag she felt in her teeth. Several times the house. Several times the thing she'd been mourning as everything. She thought of the studio's leaking kiln and the loan she paid down $40 at a time and the winter she'd worn fingerless gloves at the wheel because the heat was a line item, and she pressed her thumb into her palm until the small pain steadied her. Say it in real money. I'd rather show you than say it wrong from memory. The exact figure lives in the file, and the file is in my car. He let that sit. But it is not a small correction, Miss Bennett. It is not a few thousand you were owed. It is the difference between the life you think you have and a completely different one. I don't want a completely different one. She heard how fast she said it and hated the fear underneath. I built the one I have. I know. Something in his face when he said it, not pity, she'd have thrown the candle at pity. Something more like recognition. One person who'd made a small hard cage of a life looking at another who'd done the same. You don't have to want the money. You only have to decide whether he gets to keep it. Those are different questions, and you're allowed to answer them separately. Camille lowered her hand. Nora, don't. Nora didn't look at her. Not yet. I'm still with him. She kept her eyes on Julian, the window, the clock. You said 3 weeks from Friday. Why then? Why does a box that's held for years suddenly open and close? Because I built a hinge into it. For the first time all evening, something moved across his face that wasn't guilt, a flicker of the craftsman. The pride a maker can't fully kill even when he's ashamed of the thing he made. She knew that flicker. She'd felt it lift a bowl off the wheel. Structures like this have to breathe. Once every few years, the underlying holding has to refile, re-register, roll itself over, and in that gap, before the new shell locks, the assets inside are briefly reachable by a claim that names them correctly. Trevor's rolls over on a fixed date, because I set the date. 3 weeks from Friday, the current shell dissolves, and the new one seals, and after that, a claim would have to unwind years of lawful paperwork through a court that would take longer than either of us has and cost more than the money's worth. He spread his hands. For 19 days, there is a door. Then there's a wall. 19 days. She turned the number over. 19 days to tear open the sealed gray room she'd spent 14 months building, walk back into every part of it she'd sworn never to touch, and stand in a court and say his name out loud. And you know the door is there, she said slowly, because you built the door. Because I built the door. So you could open it again, if you ever wanted to. She watched him. For a fee. That's the reasonable suspicion. He didn't flinch from it. It's Trevor's suspicion, too. You heard him. There's always a clause. Ask him why he really left. And I can't disprove it to you tonight with a speech. Because you're right that I've had 14 months to write speeches. So I'll say only this. I'm not going to send you a bill. If you decide to reach through that door, I'll give you the file, I'll give you my hours, and the one thing I'll take out of it is the first full night of sleep I've had since I closed your case. That's the whole fee. You don't have to believe me. You have 19 days to watch whether it stays true. Down the terrace, Trevor's laugh came again, and this time it curdled something in her chest. Because she understood now what she'd been mourning next to and had never been shown. Get the file, she said. Not here. She glanced once at the golden railing where her ex-husband stood with his hand at a stranger's back. Not with him breathing the same air. Tomorrow, my studio. 10 o'clock. Bring all of it, and bring the number, and if there is one line in that file you'd rather I didn't read, leave it in. Because I will find it, and finding it will tell me everything I need to know about you. All right. He rose when she rose. 10 o'clock. She was already turning for the steps when Camille scrambled up, chair scraping, and caught her arm again. I'm coming with you. Tonight. Home. I'll follow you. We'll talk. No, Nora said. You won't. And she went down the lantern-lit steps into the warm, salt dark, past the tables of strangers who'd watched the whole thing and were pretending they hadn't, out to the gravel lot where her old wagon sat ticking as it cooled. And she got most of the way to it before she heard the sandals hurrying on the gravel behind her. Nora, stop, please. You can be furious at me the whole way, but let me at least. How long? Nora rounded on her under the single buzzing lot light, moths batting at it, the gravel warm through the thin soles of her good shoes. You said he came to you 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks you knew there was more money. 3 weeks you sat in my studio and rearranged my mugs and called me a raisin. But that isn't the how long I'm asking about, is it? Because you looked at him tonight when I asked what you weren't saying, and there's a whole thing behind your eyes, Cam. There's always been a thing. So, how long? Camille stood in the moth light with her cream linen going gray at the edges and her mascara run into 2 soft smudges. And for once, she didn't reach for the bright deflection. She wrapped her arms around herself as though the July night were cold. You have to understand how he was, she said, back then. When you married him, he was so generous, open-handed. He liked being the man who could fix a thing for you before you'd finished worrying about it. I was married to him. I know how he was. When the gallery was about to fold. Camille's voice dropped. 6 years ago. The lease, the renovation, the bank saying no. You remember I nearly lost it. I remember I offered you what I had, and you told me you'd sorted it. I had sorted it. Camille pressed her lips white. Trevor sorted it. He came to me privately. He was very clear it should be private. He said you'd be hurt that he'd gone around you, that you were proud about money. And he put in enough to save the lease and finish the build. Called it an investment. Papers and everything, a proper little agreement, his name on a share of the gallery. I thought, God, Nora, I thought it was kindness. I thought my sister had married a man who quietly rescued things. I sent him a case of wine, and I never told you because he asked me not to, and because I was ashamed I'd needed rescuing. The lot light buzzed. A car door slammed somewhere across the gravel, and an engine caught, and Nora stood very still while the shape of it assembled itself in the dark. And tonight, she said, when Julian showed you the tower, when he explained the box, he recognized the gallery, Camille's whole face crumpled and held, in the structure. One of the little shells that owns another little shell, my gallery's inside it. Nora, my lease. My renovation. The money he put into me 6 years ago wasn't kindness, and it wasn't his to give as a gift. It was seeded. It was part of building the invisible thing. It was already on its way to being hidden from you before you'd even started to lose it. I have been standing in that gallery for 6 years, hanging paintings on walls that were paid for, with your. She couldn't finish it. Her hand went to her mouth again. Nora heard the tide, far out over the flats, a long, soft exhalation of water she couldn't see. She heard her own blood in her ears. So when you decided to fix me, she said, and her voice had gone to that terrible flatness, when you called his lawyer and dressed the whole thing up as a blind date so I'd swallow it with the fish, you weren't only fixing me, you were fixing you. You needed this door opened before someone opened it the wrong way, and your gallery came out of the wall attached to it. That is not why it is a why, Camille. Don't tell me it isn't one of the whys. You're the one who taught me that people never have a single reason for anything. She was shaking now, but it wasn't tears. It was something colder and steadier and worse. You have been carrying this for 3 weeks, and the version you handed me was be brave, wear the green. You made yourself the hero of my rescue, and you didn't tell me my own sister's shop is a room inside the box he built to rob me. Because I was terrified you'd do exactly this." Camille's voice broke free, ragged, honest at last, "that you'd hear gallery and hear guilty and never let me near you again. And you know what? Fine, fine. I was protecting the gallery, and I was protecting you, and I was protecting myself, and I couldn't pull them apart. They're the same knot. They've been the same knot for 6 years, and I only just found out the rope was yours." She was crying openly now, the unpretty way. "I set that dinner because it was the only move I had left where you might come out of it whole and I might come out of it forgiven. I played it badly. I always play the important ones badly. But I did not sit on it to keep your money, Nora. I sat on it because I did not know how to tell my sister that the best thing in my life was built on the worst thing in hers." Nora looked at her for a long moment under the moth light. Then she took her keys out of her bag, and the small ordinary sound of them was very loud. "Go home, Camille." "Nora, I heard you. I'm not saying I forgive you, and I'm not saying I don't. I'm saying I have 19 days and a decision I don't know how to make, and I can't make it looking at your face right now." She unlocked the wagon. "You should know that if I reach through that door, I don't get to choose which parts of the box come out of the wall." Julian said it himself. A claim has to name the thing correctly. If I pull the money, I may pull your gallery out with it. You understand that. You've understood it for 3 weeks. That's the other reason you couldn't tell me. Because the fix for me might be the ruin of you, and you'd rather I stayed poor and quiet than choose. Camille said nothing. That was answer enough. Nora got in the wagon and shut the door and drove home through the warm summer streets with the windows down and the salt smell thinning into cut grass and hot tarmac, and she did not cry, because she had a rule about that, and she almost kept it. He came at 10 exactly. She heard the car before she saw it, tires on the gravel, outside the studio, and she stayed at the wheel with her hands in the clay a moment longer than she needed to, letting the bowl rise between her fingers, because it was the one thing in her life that still did what she asked. The back door was propped with the chipped brick. The morning was already going hot, the fan pushing warm air, the smell of wet earth and cooling glaze thick in the room. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to let him in, and found he'd already stopped in the open doorway, not presuming to cross it, a leather folder under his arm and his jacket over the other, looking at the shelves of her finished work the way people looked into rooms where a life was being lived. "You make all of these," he said. "That's generally what a studio's for." I mean, he seemed, for a second, oddly at a loss, the lawyer voice gone. "They're good. The one there, with the gray running into the blue. I don't know anything about it. I can just see it's good. It's called a hare's fur glaze, and it's a nightmare, and I've thrown out 40 for every one that survives." She stepped back to let him in. "You didn't drive over here to admire my pottery. Sit. There's coffee. It's bad. Help yourself. Put the folder there." She nodded at the wide scarred worktable by the window, floury with dried clay dust, the only flat surface in the room not already claimed by drying bowls. "And Julian, before you open it." She waited until he looked at her. "I know about the gallery. Camille told me in the parking lot, so don't manage me. Don't decide which pieces I'm strong enough for. Everything. In order, and when we get to the part where saving me sinks my sister, you say it in plain words, and you don't look away while you say it." Something eased in his shoulders, as though being told not to be gentle was itself a mercy. "All right," he said, and set the folder down, and opened it. She'd braced for the number, and still it landed. He turned a printed page toward her and put one blunt fingertip beside a figure, and the figure had too many digits in it, and she stood over it in her apron, with clay drying to grayscale on her forearms, and understood, in a slow, cold wave, exactly how much of her own grief had been unnecessary. The gloves at the wheel. The $40 a month. The winter. All of it a performance she'd staged for herself on a stage he'd built. "That's after the house," Julian said quietly. "After the split you already got. That's what stayed inside. Say it out loud." Her voice had gone strange. "I want to hear a person say it." He said the number out loud. It sat in the hot studio air among the drying bowls. Obscene and specific. "Okay," she said, when she could. "Okay." She pulled the second stool over and sat, because her legs had done their trembling thing again. "Show me the rest. Show me the box. Show me my sister's shop inside it." And he did. For the better part of 2 hours, he walked her through it, page by page, and the thing she hadn't expected, the thing that made it so much harder, was how good he was, and how good it felt to watch someone be good at a hard thing on her behalf. He laid the pages out across the worktable in a sequence, moving a drying bowl aside with the same unthinking care she'd have used, weighting a corner against the fan's breath with a dried-out sponge. He drew the tower for her on the back of a delivery receipt, box inside box inside box, his handwriting small and certain. When she asked a question, he answered the question and not a flattering version of it. When she caught something, "Wait, that dates before we were married, that shell already existed," he stopped and looked at her and said, "Yes, you see it." Most people don't see it, and she felt the compliment land somewhere she'd nailed shut and hated that it landed at all. There, he set his finger on a line 3 boxes deep. That's the gallery. The renovation loan, the lease guarantee, the share Trevor holds through 2 shells so his name never touches your sister's paperwork in public. It's real. And it's woven in, and if the claim names the structure correctly to reach the money, it names the gallery. It names the gallery. He didn't look away. She noted that he'd remembered her instruction and kept it. Your sister would have to disclose the arrangement. The share Trevor holds could be pulled into the estate we're clawing back. At best, the gallery carries a lien while it's sorted out, and she can't breathe for a year. At worst, a court decides the whole thing was part of the concealment, and she loses the lease that share is tied to. He straightened. "I can't build you a version where you take the money and the gallery is untouched. I've tried. The rope is one rope. That's the truth I drove here to hand you, and I'm not going to dress it." The fan turned. A gull went over the roof. Somewhere out on the road, Walt's delivery van would be coming later with its bags of powder, and life would go on being small and possible. If she let it. "Then here's mine," Nora said. She stood and crossed to the shelf and lifted down the gray into blue bowl he'd noticed, the survivor, the 1 in 40, and she turned it in her clay-dusted hands. 14 months ago, I decided I could live poor and quiet. I proved I could. But I never once decided I could take my sister's whole life to buy back mine. Those are different, you said. Whether I want the money and whether he keeps it. You forgot a third one. She set the bowl down between them on the worktable, next to the number. Whether I can live with what getting it back costs the one person who's still standing next to me. That's yours to answer, he said. Not mine. Not Camille's. I know. She looked at the pages. How long to decide? Really, not the Friday. The real edge. To file a claim clean, with disclosures, before the shell rolls, I'd need everything from you a week before the date. Papers, a signature, your account of the marriage's finances in your own words. He paused. 9 days. You have 9 working days to tell me whether we do this, and then the machine needs its lead time. 9 days. She opened her mouth to say something she never learned what, because the bell over the front door jangled, sharp and bright in the hot hush, and both of them turned. Trevor stood in the doorway of her studio in a fresh, open, collared shirt, sunglasses pushed up into his hair, an envelope in his hand, and behind the ease of him was something she'd seen exactly twice in 9 years and had learned to be afraid of. "The famous studio," Trevor said, looking around at the shelves, the wheel, the drying bowls, the man standing at his ex-wife's work table, over a spread of familiar pages. His gaze went to those pages and stayed a beat too long. "I did knock. There's a bell. Charming." He smiled. "Julian, twice in 1 day." "People will talk. You shouldn't be here," Nora said. "No, a man can't visit his." He caught himself, the word ex-wife, apparently too much even for him this morning, and let it go with a little shrug. "I heard you two had a lovely evening. Camille's setups are always so thoughtful." He came 2 steps into the room and set the envelope down on the corner of the work table, precisely the way a person sets down a card they've been holding all along. "I won't stay. I only wanted to give you this in person, Nora, before it arrives the boring way. I'd hate for you to open it cold. What is it?" "An offer." His eyes were bright and hard, the smile fixed. "Generous. Actually, you'll see. Given the creativity of the company you're keeping lately, I thought we might resolve any lingering confusion between us privately and cleanly. The way grown people do. There's a figure inside. It's yours. No lawyers, no courts, no dredging anything up that would embarrass anyone." His gaze flicked, deliberate, to Julian, then back. "Anyone at all. Sign it, and it's done by Friday." Everyone keeps everything they've built. He let the word built hang, and Nora understood he meant the gallery. Understood he'd known about Camille's stake all along. Understood the offer was a leash with her sister's whole life on the end of it. Or don't. And we'll all find out together, in a courtroom, exactly whose name is attached to what. He tapped the envelope once with 2 fingers. 9 days is plenty of time to be smart, Trevor said, which was when Nora knew, with a cold that went all the way down. That he'd been told the number of days, that somewhere between the terrace last night and this hot bright morning, someone had told him the shape of the clock. "Green really does suit you. Enjoy the fish." And he turned and went out, the bell jangling behind him, and through the propped door she heard his car start and pull unhurried away over the gravel. The studio was very quiet. The fan pushed the heat around. Julian was staring at the envelope on the corner of the table as though it were a thing that might go off, and his face had gone to the smooth, braced weather, watching stillness she'd seen the night before. "He knows the deadline," Nora said. "He knows about the 9 days. Julian, I only heard that number from you 20 minutes ago in this room." She looked at the man standing over her sister's shop, drawn in his own certain hand. "So you tell me right now, and you don't look away. Who else knew the clock? Who told him?" Julian did not answer at once. He looked at the envelope on the corner of the work table, and then he looked at his own hands, and then he made himself look at her. And she saw him decide to give her the worst version because she'd told him to. "I did," he said, "not on purpose. But the road runs back to me, and you'll want to hear how before you decide anything about that envelope. Then say it. Last Thursday, I needed to confirm the rollover date hadn't moved. Structures like Trevor's get repapered by whoever holds the file now, and a clerk can shift a filing window by a week without knowing what it costs anyone." He turned the water glass, that single restless quarter turn, except there was no glass here, only the scarred table, and his fingers closed on nothing and stopped. I don't hold the file anymore. I left the firm. So I called a man I trained, a junior named Ellis, and I asked him, carefully, I thought, to check one calendar date for me. Just the date. I didn't say why. I didn't say your name. But he told someone. He told his supervising partner, because that's what a good junior does when a lawyer who left under a cloud calls, asking about a live client's file. Julian's jaw worked once, and the supervising partner on that account is a man named Reed. And Reed has represented Trevor's holdings for 11 years, and I taught Ellis myself to escalate anything that smelled like exposure. I built the reflex that burned us. I called to help you, and I rang a bell in the one building I should have stayed 100 miles from. The fan turned. A drying bowl on the shelf ticked faintly as the heat found it. Nora stood over the pages of her own ruin with clay going to grayscale on her forearms, and felt the fury rise, and underneath it, something more disorienting, belief. Because a guilty man builds a cleaner story than that. A guilty man does not hand you the exact mechanism of his own carelessness and call it a bell he rang. So, he knows everything, she said. He knows you've been shown the structure. He knows the clock is on your side for 19 days. He doesn't know what you'll do. Julian nodded at the envelope. That's what the offer is for. He's frightened, Nora. That envelope is a frightened man's money. He'd rather hand you a chosen number than let a court name the real one out loud. Because the real one comes with a question. Where did it come from? And the answer to that question has my name on it as much as his. Your name. She looked at him. You'd be in it. If I fight. I'd be the person who built the box, testifying that it was built to hide. Yes, he said it flatly, the way she cut a failed bowl off the wheel. That's not a small thing for me to say in a room with a stenographer in it. It ends what's left of my practice. It opens an inquiry I won't win. But it's the only testimony that turns your claim from a long, expensive maybe into a short, certain yes. He paused. I'm telling you that so you understand the offer isn't only a leash on your sister. It's a bribe to me too. If you sign his number, I never have to say the sentence that finishes me. Nora was quiet. Out on the road, a van changed gears. The studio smelled of wet earth and cooling glaze, and the faint iron scorch of the kiln, and it was the smell of the small, safe life she'd built. And she stood in the middle of it and understood she was not going to get to keep the smell and the truth both. Get out for an hour, she said. Not because I've decided. Because I can't decide, with you in the room being reasonable at me. Come back at 2. He gathered his jacket. At the door he stopped, one hand on the frame, not crossing it. Whatever you choose, he said, the envelope's real. If you sign it, you'll be comfortable, and you'll never see me again, and no one will ever say the word fraud near your sister's lease. That's a genuine door, too. I'd be lying if I pretended the brave one was obviously better. I know it's a genuine door. She didn't look up from the pages. That's what makes it a good trap. 2 o'clock. Julian. The bell jangled. The gravel crunched, and she was alone in the heat with the number. She did not call Camille. She drove to her. The gallery sat on the shaded side of a narrow street where the afternoon light came green through a plane tree and lay in moving coins on the pavement. Through the glass, Nora could see her sister on a stepladder straightening a large canvas of the estuary at low tide, and for a moment she simply watched. Camille in a paint-smudged smock instead of cream linen, her hair scraped up, her face bare and tired, and, without an audience, 10 years older and 10 years kinder. The bell inside was a softer one than the studio's. Camille turned on the ladder and went still. You didn't call, Camille said. No, are you here to tell me, or to look at me one more time before you never do again? Camille came down the ladder rung by rung, holding the rail, and Nora saw that her hands weren't steady. Because I've been standing in here since 7 this morning trying to decide which walls were paid for with what. And I can't tell anymore, Nora. That's the horror of it. I can't tell the clean nail from the dirty one. It all just looks like my whole life. Sit down, Cam. They sat on the low bench in the middle of the room where visitors were meant to contemplate the estuary, and for a while neither of them contemplated anything. The gallery ticked and settled in the heat. Somewhere a fan she couldn't see pushed the smell of linseed and old paper around the room. He came to the studio, Nora said. Trevor, this morning. With an envelope, an offer, a number, no courts, everyone keeps everything they've built. She let the word sit the way he had. He knew about your stake. He knew about the 9 days. He knew all of it. And he smiled at me the way he used to smile when he'd already won a thing I didn't know we were playing for. Camille closed her eyes. So it's a leash. It's a leash. Sign, and you keep the gallery, and I stay comfortable and quiet, and the man who robbed me walks into a summer evening with everything that ever gleamed. Again, Nora turned to her sister. Julian says if I fight, the claim names the gallery, and best case you carry a lien for a year and can't breathe. And worst case, a court decides the whole thing was concealment and the lease goes. He says the rope is one rope. Then don't pull it. Camille's eyes came open, wet and fierce, and, for once, entirely without performance. Listen to me. I have thought about nothing else for 3 weeks, and now I've had a morning to be sure. Pull the rope, Nora. Pull it. Take back every cent he hid from you, and let my gallery come out of the wall with it if it has to. I would rather stand in an empty room that's honest than a full one that's built on the worst thing that ever happened to my sister. I mean that. I've never meant anything more. I know you mean it. Nora took her sister's paint-smudged hand, and it was the first time she'd reached first in 14 months. That's exactly why I'm not going to let you. Nora, you've spent 6 years thinking you needed rescuing and being ashamed of it. I've spent 14 months thinking the worst had already happened and being proud of surviving it. We were both wrong, Cam, and we were wrong in the same stupid way. We each decided we had to carry the thing alone so the other one wouldn't have to look at it. Nora's voice caught, and she let it, this once, in front of the estuary at low tide. I am not buying my life back with your shop. I'm going to find a third door, and if there isn't one, I'm going to make one. Because making a thing out of gray nothing is the one skill I actually have. Camille cried then, and this time Nora had a hand to give, and gave it. At 2 o'clock Julian came back to the studio and found both sisters waiting for him, and a fresh pot of the bad coffee, and the pages already laid out across the worktable in a new order, Nora's order, with the gallery shell circled in wax pencil and everything that touched it flagged with torn scraps of newsprint. I'm not signing his envelope, Nora said. And I'm not sinking her to sink him. So you're going to sit down and you're going to help me find the seam where those two things stop being the same rope. And if you tell me there isn't one, you're going to prove it to me line by line until I believe you. Because I don't take a locked door on a lawyer's word anymore. Not even yours. Something moved in his tired, careful face that she hadn't seen there before. Not relief. Exactly. The look of a man handed a hard problem by someone who trusted him to be good at it, which was, she would understand later, the only kind of forgiveness he'd have known how to accept. All right, he said, and took off his jacket and turned his cuffs back over his forearms and sat. Then we start with what a claim actually has to name and what it doesn't. They worked until the light went long and amber through the propped door. It was Camille in the end who found the loose thread, which was fitting, because Camille had lived inside the knot for 6 years without knowing it was one. She'd been reading the gallery agreement aloud, her own signature at the bottom 6 years younger, when she stopped. Wait, this says Trevor's contribution was a loan convertible to a share. Convertible. It wasn't a share yet. It became one when the gallery hit a revenue number, and we hit that number in year 2, and he converted. She looked up. But the loan, the actual money he put in, that came from an account. It had to come from an account. Which account, Julian? Where did the 6 years ago money physically come from? Julian went very still. Then he pulled a page toward him and another and traced a line with his blunt fingertip through box, inside box, inside box, and Nora watched a slow change come over him, the maker's flicker, sharper this time. It came from the shell, he said quietly, the one that rolls over. The concealment vehicle. He seeded your gallery straight out of the box he was building, which he thought was clever, because it moved money into something that looked like an ordinary investment and out of the reach of any future disclosure. He looked up, and for the first time all day something like hope crossed the table. But it cuts the other way now. If the loan came from the concealed structure, then the loan itself is a recoverable transfer. His transfer, not your sister's asset. The share he holds is what's dirty. Camille's own equity, her sweat, the years she built, the revenue that triggered the conversion, that's clean. That was never his money. We don't claw back the gallery. We claw back his share of it. We name his stake as concealed marital property and pull it into your estate. The studio was silent except for the fan and the far complaint of a gull. Say what that means in plain words, Nora said, because she had a rule now about plain words. It means the claim reaches through the gallery to take his piece of it, not hers. Julian set the pencil down. The recovered money includes the value of that share. And then you, Nora, you, with what the claim returns to you, you can redeem it. Buy the dirty share out at its value and extinguish it. Trevor's name comes off your sister's paperwork forever. The money he hid comes home to you, and the gallery ends up owned clean and whole by the one person who actually built it. He sat back. It's more work. It's a bigger claim, not a smaller one, and it needs my affidavit even more. Because the seam only holds if I'm the one testifying to where the 6 years ago money physically came from. But it's the third door. You made me find it, and it was there. Camille made a sound that was half a laugh and half the other thing, and pressed both hands over her mouth. Nora did not move for a long moment. Then she reached out and turned the gray into blue bowl a quarter turn on the table, the way he turned his glass, and she didn't notice she'd done it, and he did, and neither of them said anything about it. Then, that's what we do, she said. Draw it up. All of it. And Julian. She waited until he looked at her. The affidavit that ends your practice. You understood that door was there this morning, and you told me to consider signing the envelope so you'd never have to walk through it. Why are you smiling like that now? Because you didn't sign it, he said, and now I don't have to spend the rest of my life being the man who let you. They filed on a Wednesday, 6 days inside the window. And word of it reached Trevor Ashford by the following morning, which was how Nora came to be sitting across a different polished table from him, not a courtroom, a mediation room, wood and water glasses, and a neutral lawyer at the head who kept checking a slim gold watch. Trevor arrived in a pale summer suit with his easy sun-brown smile fixed in place, and Reed beside him. Silver, and expensive and unhurried, and for the first 10 minutes they ran the play Nora had known was coming, the reasonable regret, the generous revised figure, the gentle, grave suggestion that this sort of litigation had a way of splashing on bystanders, on family, on small businesses with narrow margins. No one wants a beloved local gallery dragged through discovery, Reed said, folding his hands. These things acquire a life of their own. Liens, publicity, it would be a shame. It would, Nora agreed. She let the silence do a little work, the way the quiet voice traveled further. Beside her, Julian sat with a single leather folder closed on the table in front of him and did not touch it. "Here's what I've learned about shame this summer," Nora said. "I spent 14 months ashamed of being left, of being lied to, of not seeing it. I wore fingerless gloves at my wheel one winter because the heating was a line I couldn't cross, and I thought that was my failing." She looked at Trevor, and she kept her voice level, and she watched the smile hold with effort. "It wasn't my failing. It was a design. You designed it. You sat 2 chairs from me while a house got divided as if it were everything, and you knew it was a curtain, and you let me grieve the wrong size of loss, because the smaller I felt, the safer your money was." She slid the envelope, his envelope, still unsigned, back across the table toward him. "I'm not buying my quiet. And I'm not spending my sister to punish you." We found the third door. "Julian?" Julian opened the folder and turned one page toward Reed and put one blunt fingertip beside a line and said, "That's the affidavit. It establishes the origin of the June transfer 6 years ago, the gallery loan, out of the underlying structure, in my hand, because I built it. It also establishes what the disclosure omitted at the time of the divorce, and who instructed the omission. He didn't raise his voice. He never had. If we proceed to a hearing, I say all of that under oath. You know what it does to the concealment defense, Marcus. There isn't one. There's just the question of how much of it gets read aloud." Reed read the page. His expensive calm did not crack, but it thinned, the way ice thins from underneath, and he set the page down and did not pick up another. "Trevor," he said, not looking at his client. "A word outside. I don't need a word." Trevor's smile had gone at last, and what was under it was the thing Nora had learned to fear across a breakfast table, except that here, in this room, with a slim gold watch ticking and Julian's folder open, it had nowhere to go. He looked at Julian, and something ugly and almost admiring crossed his face. "You'd really do it. Torch your whole license to hand her a number. God, she's got you, hasn't she? After one dinner." He turned to Nora. "You understand he built the box. He's not a knight. He's just a man who wants to feel clean, and he found the most expensive way in the world to do it, and you're the mop. Ask him why he really left the firm," Nora said. "You told me that on the terrace, so I asked." He answered. She held Trevor's gaze without heat. "Then I asked him a harder one, whether he'd say it out loud in a room where it costs him everything." And he opened the folder. "You never once, in 9 years, opened a folder that cost you anything. That's the whole difference between you, Trevor, and it took me 14 months and one blind date to see it." The neutral lawyer at the head of the table cleared his throat gently and glanced at his watch. "Given the affidavit," he said, "and the window on the filing, I'd counsel my colleague's client to consider a full settlement rather than a hearing. Shall we take 10 minutes?" They did not need 10. Reed and Trevor stepped out and came back inside 7, and the pale suit had lost something, some inch of its ease, and Trevor did not sit. He signed where he was told to sign, standing his jaw tight, and the numbers on the page came apart and rearranged themselves one last time, except this time into a shape where the money came home. And his hidden share of the gallery was released at value, and his name lifted off Camille's lease like a stain out of wet cloth. At the door he paused, because he was a man who always needed the last light coin. "Green really did suit you," he said. "It's mine now," Nora said, without turning around. "You don't get to give it back." The door closed. She heard his footsteps go down the corridor and not come back, and she sat in the quiet with her hands folded on the table, and she waited to feel triumphant. And what she felt instead was tired and clean and, faintly, like the first cool morning at the far end of a long, hot week. "That's it," Julian said quietly. "It's done. Reachable, named, redeemed, within the window. How long until it's real money in a real account?" Weeks. Machinery grinds. But it's certain now. Certain is the part that took 19 days. He closed the folder. For the first time she saw his hands were not entirely steady either. "I'll have a letter from the licensing board by autumn. Probably an inquiry. Almost certainly the end of my ticket." "I know." She looked at him. "Was it worth a night's sleep?" "I slept last Thursday," he said. "First full night in 14 months. The night after you told me to leave anything in the file that I'd rather you didn't read. I didn't leave anything out, in case you're still wondering. You'd have found it." "I know," she said. "I looked." The redemption cleared in the second week of August, on a morning so bright the studio's back door threw a hard-edged rectangle of gold across the concrete floor. Nora read the letter twice, standing at the work table, the fan pushing warm air across the drying shelves, the smell of wet earth and glaze thick as ever. Then she did the only thing she could think to do with a number that large and that strange. She went to the wheel, and she wedged a fresh ball of clay, and she threw a bowl, and it rose obedient and true between her fingers. And she cut it free clean, and it stood there small and perfect and entirely unnecessary now. Made by choice instead of need, and she found she was weeping, finally, the way she'd refused to on the drive home. And she let herself, because she'd decided somewhere in the last 3 weeks that the rule about not crying had been another curtain, and she was done with curtains. Camille found her like that, and did not say a single clever thing. She crossed the studio and put her arms around her sister from behind, mud and all, ruining the cream linen she'd sworn never to ruin, and the two of them stood at the wheel in the hot gold light and held on. "I paid it off," Camille said, when she could. "The lien came off Tuesday. The lease is mine. Clean, every nail," she laughed wetly. "I don't know how to own something clean, Nora. I've never done it before. You'll get the hang of it. You rearrange other people's clean things constantly. Now you can rearrange your own. I'm going to hang your work in the front window. You are not. I already have. The gray into blue one. It's got a little card that says not for sale, and it's making a very rich woman from the marina absolutely furious. And it's the best thing I've done all year." Julian came in the autumn, after the leaves had gone gold on the plane tree outside the gallery, and the first cool evenings had arrived and put an end to the hot greedy clay, on the day his letter from the licensing board finally came. He'd told her it would. He drove to the studio and stood in the propped doorway the way he always did, not presuming to cross it, and held up the envelope, and this time it was a real envelope with a real seal, and his face was doing something careful. "Suspended," he said, "pending the inquiry, which I'll lose." So, suspended, and then finished. That's the whole sentence. I wanted you to hear it from a person, not find it in the paper. Nora wiped her hands on her apron and came to the door and did not let him stay outside it. "Come in," she said. "You've stood in that doorway 4 months. It's ridiculous. Come in and sit down and tell me what a man does when he's spent 20 years being the best in a room at a thing he's decided to stop doing." "I don't know yet." He came in. He sat on the second stool, in the amber light, among the drying bowls. "That's the honest answer. I have some money that isn't yours. I have a great deal of time I've never had before. I've been sleeping like a person." He turned his hands over. "I keep coming back to your shelves. I don't know anything about clay, but I know it's the only room I've walked into in 20 years where I stopped being able to hear the clock." Nora looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the plane leaves ticked against the window glass in a small cool wind, and the kiln in the corner held its patient warmth, and the whole room smelled of iron and earth and the particular clean bite of a fresh glaze she'd mixed that morning. "I'm going to say a thing," she said, "and I'm only going to say it once, because I've learned that the important ones don't need saying twice." She pressed her thumb into the pad of her palm, the old anchor, and then, deliberately, she stopped and let her hand open. "You took my house. That's true, and it stays true, and I'm not going to pretend it into something prettier, because I'm done with pretty. But you're also the only person connected to the worst year of my life who ever opened a folder that cost him something. You could have let me sign his envelope and never seen me again, and slept fine. You handed me the third door instead, and it ended your whole life, and you're sitting in my studio smiling about it." Her voice did the small wet catch it did, and she let it. "I don't know what a man does next either. But there's a wheel, and there's 40 failed bowls for every good one, and I could teach you to fail at something honest with your hands. If you wanted to learn." He reached across the little space between the two stools, slowly, giving her the whole time in the world to move. And he took her clay-gray hand in both of his, and he did not say anything smooth, and he did not say anything at all for a moment, and that was the thing that told her he meant it. "I'd like to learn," Julian said. "I'd like that more than I've wanted anything in a long time." A pause, and then, because he'd learned something too, in a hot summer and a cold folder, if that's all right. "It is," Nora said. "It's all right." They were married the following June, which surprised no one and infuriated Camille only because she wanted credit for it, and Nora refused, on principle, to give her 1 inch of it, ever, until they were 90. It was a small thing in the gallery, with the estuary at low tide on the wall and the gray into blue bowl in the front window still not for sale. Camille cried through all of it and gave a toast that lasted 11 minutes and rearranged 3 flower arrangements during the ceremony itself, and Walt came in a suit no one had known he owned and delivered, instead of powder, a single wrapped parcel that turned out to be a bag of the good porcelain clay Nora could never afford, tied with a ribbon. And it was the only wedding present that made her weep. Julian never went back to the law. He learned the wheel badly, and then adequately, and then, on the 40th try, threw a bowl that survived, lopsided, thick-lipped, honest, and Nora put it on the shelf above the sink where she'd see it every morning, and refused, also on principle, to let him throw it away. He kept the books for the studio, which had, without either of them quite deciding it, become a real business the moment Nora stopped making the same small bowl over and over to prove she could survive on nothing, and started making the large, strange, beautiful things she'd been afraid to want. The hare's fur glaze, the one that was a nightmare, the one in 40, she made a whole show of them. And Camille hung it, and the rich woman from the marina bought 6. On a hot night the next July, 1 year exactly from the terrace at Marlowe's, they walked down to the water because Camille insisted on a dinner and insisted, further, that it be the same restaurant, at the same table, with the same candle, so that the story could be told properly at last, with all its principals correctly seated. The gulls complained overhead. The rigging chimed its small bright chime against the mast. The tide was out, and the air smelled of salt and hot stone, and, from the kitchen, garlic and something buttery and searing, and the warm bulbs came up gold as the sky went the deep bruised color of a summer evening. "I still can't believe you sat down," Camille said, refilling everyone's glass whether they wanted it or not. "You had 2 clean seconds. I watched you have them. You could have walked out, and I'd have deserved it. And none of this," she gestured, extravagant, at the 2 of them, at the ring on Nora's clay-scrubbed hand, at the whole improbable summer, none of it would exist. "Why did you sit down? You've never told me. A whole year, and you've never once told me." Nora looked across the little iron table at the man who had taken her house, and who had, in the taking, been the only one to see exactly how much had been stolen, and who now smelled faintly of the studio's iron and earth even in a good shirt, and she thought about the 2 clean seconds, and about all the years she'd spent making a small safe life out of gray nothing so that no one could take anything from her ever again. "Because he said there was a window," she said, "and I'd spent 14 months believing every door I had was already shut. I sat down because a stranger told me one of them was still open, and I couldn't walk away carrying that without at least looking through it." She reached over and turned her water glass a quarter turn, and caught herself doing it, and laughed. "It turns out that's the whole thing, in the end. Somebody has to tell you there's still a door. And then you have to be brave enough to sit back down and look." "That's very good," Camille said, wiping her eyes. "You should put that on a bowl." "I'm not putting it on a bowl." "Put it on a bowl, Nora." Julian said nothing. He only reached under the table and took her hand, the way he had in the studio in the autumn, both of his around hers, and the candle guttered in the warm evening air and steadied, and out past the dark line of the marina the last light lay along the water, like a glaze that had, against all odds and 40 ruined tries, finally come out right. That is where their story settles, not in the house that was taken, but in the room she built with her own 2 hands, where the door was always going to open the moment someone was brave enough to look. If this one warmed you, stay with us. Subscribe to Adrian Romance Stories, and let the next story find you.